Before starting this off, I want to give a spoiler warning for Fate Stay Night. If you have not read the visual novel, watched any of the popular anime adaptations, or can't think of what I might possibly mean with the video's title, then please click off now, because otherwise you're going to ruin some of the story's more interesting reveals. Something to note before kicking this off though, I'm basing a lot of what I'm talking about on the Ultimate Edition patch for Re Altanua, as opposed to the anime or a different translation of the visual novel. Don't know if that affects anything, but there you go. Finally, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. The subject matter is steeped in speculation, so coming up with a definitive answer is near impossible. I may be firm in what I'm saying, but it's just my interpretation. I know I'm most likely incorrect about all of this, but I still need to present things in a concise manner. At the end of the day, this is just meant to be a fun discussion. So, one last time, if you care about spoilers, this is your final warning. Alright, cool, we're moving on. For those who've stayed around, the timeline my video is in reference to is the one which sees Emiya Shiro become Emiya Archer, specifically his 5th Grail War, and what exactly happened outside of the vague allusions given to us. That being, it was similar to the Fate route, but Saber's heart couldn't be saved. I refer to this as the quote-unquote original timeline because, when you think about it, this is where Stay Night truly begins. It's the prologue before the prologue proper. It's what gives birth and creates Archer. What sets this timeline apart from all the others, shown or otherwise presumed, would be the fact Emiya Archer is not present. Lofty claim, I know, but bear with me. In Stay Night, Rin and Shiro assert that the Holy Grail can call upon servants from the future as it pertains to Archer. Whether or not this is actually the case instead of an incorrect assertion from our story's narrators is up for debate. Archer, unlike most heroic spirits, has a set of circumstances unique wholly to him. He's a counter-guardian, a strange multiversal being that does the bidding of a higher power. Though he's a heroic spirit, he is not a normal heroic spirit. Therefore, the precedent he sets may not be representative of the Holy Grail as a whole. This is important to keep in mind going forward, because time travel in Fate is a genuine mess that doesn't make any sense. What information is present can sometimes be contradictory, vague as hell, which can easily spawn an endless argument. Essentially, how one views time travel within this setting will determine how they interpret the validity of my video's very premise. If one believes time is fluid, that it can wrap back in on itself, then the premise is not valid. There can never be a timeline where Archer isn't present during the Grail War, because even if the timeline where he becomes a counter-guardian hasn't happened yet, it will happen. This means Archer can appear even if the events leading to his creation have not transpired. If one believes time is segmented, that changes in the timeline spawn an alternate reality, then the premise is valid. Though Archer goes back in time to alter the events which led to his creation, the timeline which created him still happened and is therefore separate, unaffected. Essentially, there's a multiverse. I am firmly in the camp that time in Stay Night is segmented, mostly on account of the paradox which is presented when it comes to time being fluid. How can Archer be present if the events leading to his creation haven't happened yet? That sort of thing. Shiro and Rin assert that this paradox is in fact what is happening. However, the way Archer talks about his time as a counter-guardian makes it appear as if something else is going on. He's been dispatched across numerous alternate realities and timelines to clean up the mess left in its wake. This suggests a multiverse as opposed to a singular, constantly changing timeline. I guess what I'm getting at here is, within the confines of Fate's Stay Night and what's relevant to its story, we have two conflicting narratives. Shiro and Rin's is an assertion based on an observation, while Archer is a recount of lived experience. One is a more limited perspective, lacking critical information, while the other is a bit more concrete. At worst, Shiro and Rin are possibly wrong, whereas Archer is simply biased. From my point of view, I trust a biased perspective more than one which can be outright incorrect, at least when it comes to speculation, hence why I believe time is segmented. Now, there is one thing I do want to clear up. I still believe a hero from the future can be summoned into the past, but there still has to be a timeline where they become a hero. They can appear in the past, just not in that past. There still needs to be an unaffected point of origin for the individual in question. Otherwise, you delve into paradox territory, which Fate has seemingly avoided, at least in regards to Stay Night. This holds doubly true for Archer and Shiro, since the 5th Grail War and how that plays out directly leads into Archer's creation. His mere presence changes everything. He directly alters the course of events as witnessed with every route. During Fate, for instance, Archer's advice aids in Shiro breaking through to Saber, something he himself failed to do. So if Archer is present in the actual timeline of his creation, then he shouldn't exist on account of everything being different, something which Unlimited Blade Works makes clear cannot happen, since Archer killing Shiro literally changes nothing. He can appear in an identical timeline, but not his own. So to summarize that mess of words, timelines can be altered, but a point of origin must still exist. A hero can go back into the past, just not the past of their creation. This holds especially true for Archer, since the 5th Holy Grail War and its aftershock directly result in his creation. If he is present in that quote-unquote original timeline, things break. If he could advise his younger self, his actual younger self, on how to save Saber, why wouldn't he? This is why I believe Emiya, as Archer, was not around during the events of the original timeline. With that hopefully established, let's move on. In Stay Night, very little is known about the timeline which created Archer other than a few vague allusions. What we know for certain is this: things played out in a similar manner to the Fate route, but Shiro couldn't save Saber from her self-destructive mindset. Beyond that, there are no other details of the Grail War, however, it's certain it didn't end in calamity. Rejoice. After the war, Shiro would travel the world and pursue his dream of becoming a hero. He'd eventually form a contract with an otherworldly being, gain a tremendous amount of power, and become the very thing he longed to be. This would backfire, with the very people Shiro looked to protect growing to hate him. He'd eventually die, be vilified by the world he tried to save, and become a counter-guardian upon death. A very specific type of servant which isn't relevant enough to explain. We also know that, at some point, Shiro did have a lover. Though a name isn't given, we can probably guess who. It is the details of Archer's 5th Holy Grail War, the original timeline, which I want to explore and try to figure out. Though we know the end result, we don't know a single thing about the journey. Archer's exclusion, even in a route he isn't all that present for, like Fate, simply changes everything. Without his presence, Rin doesn't have a servant, and Shiro never gets stabbed in the heart. Bold claim, I know, so let me explain. During her summoning, Rin used a pendant her father left her as a catalyst. Traditionally, a prospective master would use an item associated with a specific servant to increase the chances of getting said servant. Because she was out of time and options, Rin used what was available and hoped for the best. She believed the pendant's magical energy would draw something out, hoping for Saber, but getting Archer instead. This is important to take note of because this pendant was the very same used to save Shiro after Ku stabbed him in the heart. It was an artifact for a future hero, the only item in existence which could serve as a catalyst for Emiya Archer. Now, this is where things get genuinely complicated to explain. In the original timeline, this pendant would have no association with any heroic spirit. The chances for it to draw something out would have no doubt been far slimmer than it was with the near guarantee for Archer. Keeping that in mind, as well as Rin's tendency to screw up when it really counts, as shown with Archer's summoning, I suspect she would have been unable to summon anything. She'd still have the potential to be a master, just not be one outright. Without a servant, Rin wouldn't have been attacked by Ku while investigating the school's boundary field. There wouldn't have been a duel which Shiro stumbled upon. He wouldn't have been stabbed in the heart. The whole beginning of Fate's Stay Night would essentially be rewritten. Though Saber would still emerge in the dead of night, because she just appears without the preparation of a ritual, everything that precedes that moment would be vastly different. There's still a chance Rin could have been able to summon some sort of servant. However, I find this doubtful on account of the prologue itself, stating she more or less failed. Emiya Archer was an anomaly. He wasn't meant to happen, but did. There's also the added fact that this route played out in a similar manner to Fate. A new servant thrown into the mix simply changes far too much, making this highly unlikely given what we know. Now, I can hear some of you asking, if Shiro doesn't get saved by Rin's pendant, then how would it have any meaning to Archer? Why could it be used as a catalyst? Those are very fair questions with at least two answers. The first being weak but a bit more concrete, and the second requiring some speculation based on what we know of Archer's future following the Fifth Grail War. Starting with the weak answer first, Rin's pendant brought about Archer because in the near future, it would save Shiro's life. Because the boy's possible future self was already a heroic spirit, it could be used as a catalyst on account of it having meaning to Shiro in place of Archer himself. Though they're two separate entities, they are still the same person, even if time is segmented. As you may expect, I'm not the biggest fan of this explanation. It's kinda lame and fails to account for something rather critical. Archer, for a reason never fully explained, has a copy of Rin's pendant, or rather, the original. Why would this be the case? Why would a heroic spirit hold on to something so comparatively mundane if there wasn't meaning behind it? It is now at this point I want to delve into the more speculative answer, as well as bring up one of the few details we have about Archer's life, his lover. During the Fate route, a mutual attraction develops between Rin and Shiro. However, Saber ends up becoming the priority on account of just how things play out. From what little we know, the original timeline unfolds in a similar fashion with a key difference. Emiya is unable to save Saber, possibly signifying a weaker relationship between the pair. It would make sense then that, with Saber's romantic absence, what was developing between Rin and Shiro during Fate grows into something more akin to Unlimited Blade Works. But how does the pendant factor in, I can hear a bunch of you ask. I'll be blunt, I don't know, at least not fully. As backwards as this sounds, to reach the beginning of that answer, we need to ask yet another question. Without the Grail War, Rin doesn't get to know Shiro. So, without a servant, why is she fighting in the first place? I'd imagine Rin would still investigate the boundary field at her school on account of being Fuyuki's Magus, but beyond that, I can't say much else. We delve into fanfiction territory as opposed to speculating with our limited evidence, and I'd like to avoid that. Bearing that in mind, Kodamin was adamant for Rin to become a master, or at the very least, go to the church if she was to drop out for whatever reason. Unlike Stay Night's prologue, she would have a reason to do precisely as the priest says. Her summoning failed, and I believe it is this reason that would see her join the war. As everyone should be well aware, at the time of the Fifth Grail War, Kodamin had two servants. The first is Ku, who he stole from a foreign mage, and the second is Gilgamesh, his servant from the Fourth Grail War. If Rin failed her summoning, then the birth of Avenger, Kodamin's ultimate goal, is now far less likely to happen. An archer could still be summoned, however, that servant and its master become an unknown factor. Makes things messy, which Kodamin wants to avoid. It's for that reason he killed Ku's original master. I believe, when considering a whole host of factors across Fate's Stay Night, that Kodamin would, quote-unquote, give Gilgamesh to Rin in a similar vein to how he gave him to Shinji. He'd concoct a lie, state her summoning wasn't a total failure, and that one of the final servants appeared at the church instead of before their master. The priest would choose Gilgamesh over Ku for the simple fact that Gilgamesh is, more or less, on his side. He's less likely to tell Rin what is actually going on than Ku. Kodamin would probably do this for a few reasons, the first being entertainment. Rin struggling to control her servant, the possibility of witnessing her being betrayed would no doubt be something he'd take pleasure in. The second is ensuring Avenger's birth. If the ritual is absent a servant, then that may not come to pass. Making Gilgamesh official in this war, so to speak, would aid in furthering Kodamine's wider goal. There's a chance Archer could still come into being, an Archer. However, if the original timeline played out in a manner similar to the Fate route, I find this doubtful. At least, doubtful in that it would change anything in a meaningful way, assuming of course it happened at all. As Heaven's Feel explains, the Grail simply needs the heroic spirits to be defeated so it can suck up the necessary energy. If Gilgamesh is present and actively participating from the outset, then it may go without creating another Archer, letting the King of Heroes take up that mantle. Energy is energy, after all, and the Grail has a tendency to break its own rules. It's not out of the realm of possibility. However, there is another reason I assert Gilgamesh would be given to Rin, and that would be the ending of Unlimited Blade Works. Archer tells Shiro he's the only one who can defeat Gilgamesh, that his noble phantasm, his reality marble, is the ultimate weapon against him. Here's a simple question. How does Archer know that? The easy answer would be that he's seen it throughout the countless alternate realities he's had to live through as a servant. However, I'm not entirely convinced by this. Shiro came upon a way to beat Gilgamesh because of Archer's words. He didn't think of it on his own. There has to be a point of origin for this line of thinking, and since Archer is Shiro with far more experience, I believe this point starts with him. I believe he came upon this conclusion on his own come the 5th Grail War's end. Rewinding this back to Rin having Gilgamesh for a bit. The day-to-day details of the Grail War are still up in the air. However, I'd imagine Rin would still pair up with Shiro. He's trustworthy. Kodamine and Gilgamesh are not. She'd most likely gather something wasn't quite right. It'd be wise to have an ally in case everything falls apart. Since Gilgamesh has, let's just say, the hots for Saber, I'd wager he wouldn't mind such an arrangement, at least for the time being. Having said that, the pair meeting and realizing each other are masters would play out much differently. Ku wouldn't attack Shiro's home, nor would Rin be rushing toward it since Shiro was never stabbed in the heart. Ilya, however, is still on the streets of Fiyuki, as is Rin on account of going to the church. These two facts would most likely result in some sort of battle which sees the three main parties in question collide. Either Ilya would attack Shiro at his home, prompting Rin to investigate, or she would attack Rin, prompting Shiro to investigate. One would do so out of a desire to win, and the other to protect. Either way, the battle would go poorly for Berserker. He'd have to face a full power Saber, as well as Gilgamesh. He may not die outright, but it would certainly be trouble, regardless of whether or not this is how the fight plays out, or if there's a fight in the first place. What is important to take note of is how unlikely it would be for Saber to get hurt like she did in Fate. She's fresh, with possibly powerful backup, so the overwhelming guilt Shiro feels when he sees her wounded wouldn't be present. Much of the pair's early relationship would then go undeveloped, laying the groundwork for his inability to save her come the war's end. From there, things would progress in a similar manner as Fate, but with Gilgamesh probably staying out of the fight due to pride or arrogance instead of an injury like Archer. He'd most likely attempt to seduce and tempt Saber, prey upon her desire for the Grail, further cementing her inability to turn away from it. All around, Gilgamesh's presence would prevent most of the characters who rely upon each other for growth to, well, grow. Neither Saber nor Shiro learn the lesson they desperately need, resulting in the pair making the same fundamental mistake. This is why I believe, more so than anything, Gilgamesh would be given to Rin instead of a new Archer being summoned in Emiya's place. He's the piece that allows a lot of different factors to link up nicely, especially when you consider the personality and motivations of someone like Kodamine. He keeps things stagnant, both from a meta perspective. By staying out of the fight, the timeline progresses like Fate, and a more character-orientated one. Nobody changes. If there was a new Archer, or at the very least, one that was relevant, the same effect wouldn't be achieved. Now, this isn't to say everything is all doom and gloom. Remember, the characters are still able to avert calamity. There's a silver lining, some good that comes from Gilgamesh's presence. Shiro's unlimited blade works. Let's talk about Rin's pendant. With Shiro not getting stabbed in the heart, Rin's pendant has all its magical energy still saved up. Unlike Stay Night proper, it can be used as a trump card like Rin had intended. That, alongside presumably forming a bond with Rin, like in the Unlimited Blade Works route, since his relationship with Saber isn't as strong as it is in Fate, Shiro would be able to access his reality marble come the war's conclusion. Naturally, this beggars a few questions. Namely, how would he know he could do that, and why would he need it in the first place? The first question is easy to address. Through a missable conversation you can eavesdrop on in Fate, Rin realizes Shiro is doing some pretty insane magic he shouldn't be able to. This is later expanded upon in Unlimited Blade Works, where it's explained Shiro's power stems from a reality marble. Since this happens just by being around Shiro, I suspect Rin would come upon this revelation in the original timeline. The second question, however, is trickier, for it relies upon conclusions made a bit earlier in the video. Archer knowing Gilgamesh can be defeated by his reality marble has to stem from somewhere. There has to be a point of origin for this line of thinking, since it's Archer himself who explains so to Shiro. Something had to happen, and I believe that something stems from Gilgamesh's presence. By not being on the receiving end, Rin and Shiro would have been able to get a better understanding of Gilgamesh's noble phantasm, especially if he outright told them about it as a boast, which I don't feel is out of character. They would have had time to plan accordingly, take measures in case the King of Heroes betrayed them, which he certainly would once the war neared its end. After all, Gil is still Gil, and he was never truly on their side. This would lead the pair to a similar conclusion as that in Unlimited Blade Works, how Shiro's latent power could be the deciding factor in winning the war. In the end, Shiro would have to face off against Gilgamesh, use his connection with Rin as well as her pendant, and activate his reality marble, ending the Grail War by defeating the King of Heroes and, presumably, Kodamin. It would give context to how Archer came upon that conclusion, show how the Gilgamesh deviation brought about this line of thinking, as well as cement how doomed Shiro ultimately was. Unlike every other route or even timeline, the pendant served to perform Shiro's first miracle as a hero, instead of miraculously saving his life, thus making it a perfect catalyst. If Archer refuses the call, if he doesn't answer the summoning, then everything will play out as it had before. The boy would continue to pursue his dream of becoming a hero, and leave behind those he cared about. Considering how much Rin means to Archer, I doubt he wants that to happen again. Not for Shiro's benefit, but hers, hence why he still holds on to her pendant. So to summarize, Rin fails her summoning on account of her catalyst meaning nothing to any heroic spirit in existence, as well as other factors the prologue alludes to. She then goes to the church having failed only to receive Gilgamesh from Kodamin, who is scheming behind the scenes similar to every other route. Any Archer that may appear in Emiya's place either doesn't emerge or remains irrelevant, otherwise it compromises what we know about the timeline. Since there was never a duel Shiro stumbled upon, he isn't stabbed in the heart, meaning Ku never attacks his house after learning he survived, ultimately resulting in Saber being able to fight Hercules without getting hurt, assuming of course there is still a fight. Because she was never injured, Shiro doesn't feel the guilt, which begins his character development. Eventually, Rin and Shiro decide to team up, on account of Rin not trusting her servant or Kodamin, where the timeline plays out in a similar manner as Fate. Gilgamesh rarely chooses to fight, however, his presence eventually taints several relationships, resulting in characters remaining stagnant, namely Shiro and Saber, who remain stuck in their ways. Believing a betrayal was on the horizon, Rin works with Shiro to form a plan on how to defeat Gilgamesh. After coming to understand his noble phantasm, they decide to use Shiro's reality marble at the conflict's conclusion and win the Grail War. The details surrounding Saber's ultimate fate are, sadly, still up in the air. She presumably made it close or to the end, but still clung to her self-destructive mindset. I don't believe she got her hands on the Holy Grail, since that's a massive can of worms both in relation to what happens in Heaven's Feel as well as time travel itself, but beyond that, I can't say much more. There's just not enough to go on. Personally, I'd find it fitting if Shiro pulled the same stunt as his father and ordered Saber to destroy it with a command seal. Would certainly explain the guilt he carried for the rest of his life. But with that said, I've been Bufar191. Tell me what you thought in the comments down below. I'll see all you guys next time. Goodbye.